All right. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So I'm just, first of all, thanks for having me in today. Great to be with you. I thought for a few minutes up front, just share with you a little bit more about my background, why I'm running for mayor, and then look forward to a conversation about policy and so forth and whatever's on your mind. So my personal background, I'm lucky enough to be born and raised here in San Francisco. My mom was actually from Germany. She grew up in a poor farming community in the north part of Germany by the Baltic Sea. Our farm was actually bombed out during World War II, and she immigrated originally to the US, like a lot of young women of her generation, as an au pair in New York City, and found her way to the West Coast when she was in her mid 20s and landed in Alameda, of all places, and got a job as a stewardess, taking the troops on a charter airline, taking the troops back and forth to Vietnam. And my dad, on the other hand, is a New Yorker through and through. He grew up in Queens. His father was a New York police officer. Again, very humble beginnings, no car, no TV. His pathway was through the military. And so he ended up becoming a B-52 pilot in the Air Force, did 3 tours of duty over in Vietnam. And my parents met there on an R&R weekend in Okinawa, Japan, on a double date, and they fell in love. And my dad's dream, and he was already in his mid 30s at the time, was to go to law school. And so he applied from over there, got into USF, and moved to San Francisco with my mom in 1969. The choice was either live by Hamilton Air Force Base, which was in Marin, it's now defunct, or close to the Presidio. And they chose the Presidio, and so they moved on $200 a month in rent. My mom was a steward, my dad was part-time Air Force. They rented a 2-bedroom flat in the marina just outside the Presidio gates. And 5 years later, I came along, and I basically grew up right here inside the Presidio. So the Officers Club, right up the road there, that's where my parents were sucking down 25-cent margaritas when I was in the corner of the bar growing up with a coloring book. The church over there, the Our Lady Chapel, that's where I went to church. Letterman was my hospital growing up. The sports basement down on Chrissy Field is where I shopped for groceries as a kid. And I will say, until I left my investment firm that I founded in 09 a number of months ago, our office was just down the road here, literally the last building, the Pacific Union building down here by the tunnel top. So being here in the Presidio is awesome because this is home to me. And so it's great to be with you. My wife, Liz, and I were raising 3 kids in the city. We have a daughter who's actually now a freshman in college, I should say, out in Boston. We have 2 sons, one who's a junior in high school and one who's a 6th grader as well. And I was served in City Hall for 7.5 years. Member of the Board of Supervisors representing District 2 for 7 of those years, which included the Presidio, by the way, and became the longest serving budget chair in our city's history during that time, and then became interim mayor when Ed Lee unfortunately passed away in 2018. I left City Hall in 2018 specifically because of my kids. If you know me at all, I am a dad first, just through and through. I love coaching sports teams. I love traveling with them. I love engaging in school. And I will say it's been an amazing 6 years out of City Hall. When I left in 2018, our city was simply in a much different, much better spot than it is today. And, you know, last year, some people started to come to me and say, hey, we think you should run for mayor again. My first comments back were, you know, a string of no ways and 4-letter words. But at the end of the day, for me, I decided to jump in because it's combining 7.5 years inside of City Hall and the only candidate that's ever held a single job in the private sector. And I've been in the private sector for over 20 years. My career outside of City Hall is 3 years as an attorney in Silicon Valley at a law firm called Wilson Sonsini. Got into finance up here in San Francisco at Thomas Weisel Partners, and then started a venture fund and grew into a broader investment platform in 2009. And to me, what I want in a mayor right now in San Francisco, as someone who's been a simple resident the last 6 years, is someone who's going to hit the ground running and start to make a difference in my life right away. And for me, my background with public sector and private sector experience, having been in that seat before, having been mayor before, to me is a combination that will allow me to actually hit that ground running on day one with a strong vision of where we need to go as a city. So for me, this is not about a career. My wife reminds me this will be the worst financial decision we'll ever make as a family. This is not about ego at all. I've been mayor before. I've been in City Hall for 7 years. Again, I'm a dad. I'm a dad of 3 kids. That's what I really care about. But aside from my kids, I will tell you there's only one other thing I'll fight for with an equal passion and vigor, and that's our city of San Francisco. This always has been, always will be home for me. I love it. I believe our brightest days are ahead of us, but we need to change the leadership to get there. And that's why I'm running. So again, appreciate you having me in here today. Look forward to our conversation and happy to take it away or if that works.
Yeah, let's have a conversation. Let's go. So as you may have heard, we are very passionate about ending homelessness here in San Francisco. We are a group of dreamers and optimists, and we believe that we have enough resources and we have, with the right coordination tools, we can solve this problem. So I'd like to know, this is a multifaceted problem, and it really starts with the housing crisis in San Francisco. So let's maybe start there. What do you plan to do about housing in San Francisco, creating more affordable housing, especially for extremely low income and low income residents here in the city?
Yeah, great question. Look, housing's been a real issue in our city for a long time, and the honest answer is the last few years we've really failed as a city around housing. And I'm of the belief that we simply need to build more housing at every income level, to lower the cost of housing for everybody, and obviously to support those that really can't fend for themselves. So, by order of magnitude, we're under state mandate to build approximately 10,000 units of housing a year right now in San Francisco. To level set, last year we built 2,000 units, and this year we're on pace to build 400. And as of 2 months ago, year to date in our planning commission, we approved 16 new units year to date in San Francisco. So we're not remotely keeping pace with our state mandate, which, we can argue about if you want. But from my perspective, I believe we need to build housing in every neighborhood. I do believe the biggest upzoning potential exists downtown, south of Market, Mission Bay, but we need to build in every neighborhood. We need to be incredibly pro-housing as a city. I believe that's zoning. I believe that's legislation. I also believe that's mayoral directives to our planning department to streamline. We're simply a place where developers don't want to invest right now. And the reality is we have 35,000 units that have been fully entitled in San Francisco, but examples abound where developers are simply not willing to put money into our city anymore because they don't believe in our leadership and the direction of San Francisco. You think about the Ocean White site on First and Mission. I'm sure you've driven by there at some point or walked by there. $30 million of steel in the ground, abandoned. They'd rather abandon $30 million of steel than continue to build because they're going to lose money. The one I think about often is the Giants ballpark, right across in China Basin. So Tishman Speyer owns that development. That's Lot A, if you ever used to park there for the Giants games. And the first phase is entitled and fully built out. They just kind of finalized it. If you haven't been down there, it's pretty cool. There's like fire pits and parks and starting to becoming more of a neighborhood in Mission Bay, which I do think that neighborhood needs to work on quite a bit. But phase 2 is right next door, fully entitled, flat land. They're not building. And I asked him why, and he said, hey, look, as soon as we break ground, we're going to lose money because the conditions that we agreed to X number of years ago to build, now the city has deteriorated. So we have, our rental assumptions are 25% down and we can't make a pencil anymore. So we're investing our money in Texas and in Minnesota and in other places where it makes sense for us. And so, for us as a city, in terms of City Hall, we need to change a lot inside of City Hall. We need to make planning better and zoning and legislation. Happy to talk through those details. But ultimately, we also need to go back to developers that have fully entitled projects and say, what's it going to take for you to break ground? Not to be a developer giveaway, but actually, we need you to break ground, and you're voting with your money and your pocketbooks right now going elsewhere. And those, to me, it's very low-hanging fruit and something we can get after right away.
Okay, great. So that's kind of a long-term vision. That's something that's going to be, not immediate, but definitely something that will set us up for success in the future. So let's talk about some immediate needs. We are really facing a crisis here on the streets of San Francisco and with our homelessness issues, and which is a multifaceted issue that involves housing, mental health, substance use. How do you plan to address the immediate needs of those living on the streets today?
Yeah. So I think about homelessness is there's no silver bullet. To your point, this is multiple policies taken together to have a comprehensive effect for people living on our streets, for our city of San Francisco. So I think of a few things. One, it is housing, to your point. We need to build more housing across all income levels. I also think that ultimately we need to think about shifting from a housing first approach to a shelter first approach here in San Francisco, because if we're building housing at, $800,000 to $1 million a clip per unit in San Francisco, we are never going to have enough public subsidy to fully house all those that are homeless today on the streets of our city, let alone if we did that. Could you imagine the influx that would come to San Francisco to say, hey, San Francisco's permanently housing everyone for the, permanent subsidized housing? That will never work. And so to me, my North Star here on all of this is how do we get people off the streets, give them a chance at a different life? And we can talk about services and how we do that. And it could be mental health, could be substance abuse, could be career transitions, what have you. But how we get people off the streets first and give them a chance at something different, as opposed to right now, I feel a lot of times our city hall's approach is around enabling street behavior, whether it be the fentanyl crisis, whether it be just raw homelessness and people suffering from mental illness. And I'm very aware that the overlapping Venn diagram of people living on the streets encompass a lot of these different issues. So for me, so I talked about housing there. To me, a few things, in terms of program and policies that I think work. One, again, shifting from a housing to get people off the streets. We want to make it such that we need to make it attractive for those to want to come off the streets. But I also think from a policy perspective, we have to be very real and consistent that we're not going to allow people to choose to sleep on our streets because they want to live a certain lifestyle in San Francisco. And I know that over time we have developed that reputation as a city. When I was mayor, we started implementing what was before passed as Proposition A, where we basically offered people shelter and housing that were sleeping in tents. And this is more a kind of tent encampment question. And if they, we offer them shelter and housing. We had enough shelter and housing. To your point about Web3 technologies, making sure we have transparency about what shelter beds are open today, because hundreds every single night go unused because there's no coordination here and no honest transparency around that. But if they say no to shelter and housing, we took their tents away. Not to be harsh, but the reality is, in my view, nobody's getting better by sleeping in a tent at night in San Francisco. The health issues that exist, I witnessed the public safety issues between crime, just arson, rape. I mean, it's truly off the charts. And then also, I want to be very clear with folks that I believe our sidewalks of our city belong to everybody. And we want to help you. But if you don't accept our version of help to get you off the streets, we're going to make it inconvenient for you to be on the streets of our city because of the elderly and, again, young families. And I believe it belongs to everybody. And that, to me, is a reputational shift that we have to go through once again. And I think about that as it relates to homelessness. I think, quite frankly, a reputational shift as well as it relates to the drug crisis on our streets. Right now, City Hall's approach around harm reduction and fentanyl, to me, simply is oil and water. We are handing out free packets of tinfoil and straws to those suffering from fentanyl addiction on our streets. To me, that's not humane. That's not progressive. We're enabling people to slowly kill themselves on the streets of our city. We're breaking our own record every year for the number of OD deaths, overdose deaths on the streets. And it's simply the wrong policy. Again, I want to help people get off the streets, connect them with services, and give them a chance at something different in life, as opposed to enabling the drug crisis today. I literally met a guy in the Tenderloin a month ago that had flown in from Hawaii. And I said, well, why? He said, well, I heard you can do fentanyl here and people will leave you alone. Okay, that's a reputational problem. And so again, to me, harm reduction is going to be a part of this policy approach. At the end of the day, methadone, that we have a methadone clinic. I'm happy to dive deep on, double click on this, open 4 hours a week right now in San Francisco is a joke, right? If you're on fentanyl, you're taking a hit every hour and a half or 2 hours. If someone at some point becomes lucid enough to say, I want to make a different decision right now, but it's Monday at 4 p.m. and you say, sorry, come back Friday at 7 a.m., that's not going to work. They're done. They're long gone. That's a joke. We have to have, and what I've been very clear about is declaring a fentanyl state of emergency when I'm in office. As soon as I get in there, it allows you to ask the state and the feds for financial resources, law enforcement help, but also reallocate. The third part is legally reallocate existing budget and headcount to that emergency. And what I've been very public about is creating and building a 24/7 centralized intake center, massive more shelter capacity, services attached to it. So almost thinking about almost as triage, people coming off the streets. It's going to be substance abuse. It's going to be mental health. It's going to be a myriad of things, but a chance to get people off the streets and start them on their way. And again, harm reduction can be part of that, but I'm also a big fan of absence-based approaches, things that Salvation Army and other groups are doing here in San Francisco. To me, that's a direction we need to head in with fentanyl, because this harm reduction fentanyl, again, from my perspective, is not working. So anyways, so sorry, I'm going all over the place.
No, you're doing great.
But also,
We'll dive a little bit deeper on some points. So continue.
And then, it's also policies that have worked in the past that aren't being followed through on today. For instance, the mayor's current approach to homelessness is arresting people for being homeless. I think that's wrong. I don't think it works. Again, let's get people shelter and housing, or let's get them off the streets and set policies in place where we're enabling people or helping people get off the streets and encouraging that. But just arresting you for being homeless, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And when I was in office before, I talked about this at a number of different events. We had a program called Project Homeward Bound that had tremendous success in the city of San Francisco. And this was basically if Mark was homeless on the streets of our city and I was from a different part of the U.S., if the city of San Francisco could find a loved one on the other end of the line that would house me, the city of San Francisco could legally give me a bus ticket, meal money home. Okay. So when I was budget chair, I had a study done on this just to really dive deep on it. And it turned out 70% of these individuals a year later were still housed in that housing situation. Radical success for people being homeless on San Francisco streets to a year later continue to be stably housed. That is amazing success. And so I quadrupled the budget for that program. By the time I left office as mayor, we were sending over 100 people home a month. And you think about a numerator of about 5,000 unsheltered a night in San Francisco, we were churning about 1,200 people home a year. That's a real effect on the streets of our city. Because I was so highly associated with it at the time, this mayor abandoned it, such that last year, I think less than 200 people went home on Homeward Bound. And now it's about busing people out of town. And again, to me, it might scratch somebody's itch, but I don't think it's sustainable. And ultimately, as well as a city, we're inviting busing wars with the southern border governors of those border states, and we're going to lose that war. And so to me, let's focus on helping individuals with programs that have success and not just get into these kind of demagoguery type of behaviors and policies. I think it's really, really different. So again, for me, homelessness, I think there's a few things. I think it's housing. I think second of all, it's services attached to that housing, not just getting people off the streets and say good luck. I think it's addressing tenant encampments and street behavior and discouraging that on the streets of our city. I think it's enacting programs that get people home to where they're from that have been effective and proven in the past. And then it's a myriad of other smaller programs, making sure we have the LOST program in San Francisco. We're giving rental subsidies for people that are on the verge of becoming homeless. We want to do that as well to continue to stem the tide of people being homeless on the streets of our city. So to me, it's very much a multi-pronged approach. I think we can have a dramatic difference on the streets of our city in the first year or two in office. It just takes a change of leadership inside of City Hall.
Okay, you touched on many, many different things here. I'm going to go kind of to the center of one point that that I think would really touch a lot of hearts in this room, and it's this this strategy about creating some type of triage center, more shelter beds with wraparound services. So just because I feel like we could spend a lot of time just even talking about that. So could you just maybe walk us through what is kind of, a short-term plan and a long-term plan of what that vision could look like?
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason we can't stand that up in the first year at all. And by the way, I also think San Francisco and our leaders need to get away from the idea that unless we build it here or create it here ourselves, we shouldn't emulate other models, right? Centralized intake centers exist in other cities in the US. Philadelphia has one that's working. Other cities have one that's working. There are garbage cans that are readily available, for $10,000 on the streets around the U.S. and we build our own for $700,000. It doesn't make sense. We don't need to do it our own way every time in San Francisco. Let's look elsewhere about best practices. What's working in other jurisdictions? What's not working in other jurisdictions? Talk to other leaders about what's been working around homelessness, around many other issues. So to me, a centralized intake center, yes, is massive more shelter capacity. It frustrates me so much as you think about, especially around the drug crisis right now, people on the streets. Oftentimes, City Hall's approach today is rent them an SRO room in the Tenderloin with no services and think it's going to work. Take a step back. I have a drug addiction. The city solution is to stick me in the Tenderloin and leave me alone, say good luck. That's a joke. It's insane. People get bored in their rooms. They go down to the street level and there's a drug dealer and there you go. We're back into that cycle. So to me, how do we create massive more shelter capacity, but those services attached to them? And again, everyone's going to come in different. There's no cookie cutter approach here, but you have to have the services there available to start treating people. And then, as I think about, let's think about the drug issue and the drug crisis. Again, sticking someone in the tenderloin alone, I don't know, doesn't make much sense to me. I think we need to start thinking outside the box as a city government about creating conditions and environments and facilities where people actually might heal and get better. So the ones I've been very public about, for instance, we own a facility in San Mateo County near Half Moon Bay called Log Cabin Ranch. It used to be part of our juvenile probation department. 22 acres, lots of beds, has plumbing. It's been shuttered for a number of years now. We can reopen that facility, have services attached to it, and think about a little bit more of a rural setting where somebody might go there, might be attractive because this has to be voluntary, to go there to actually recover in a different setting than the Tenderloin itself. We own land from here up to Hetch Hetchy in Yosemite. We have never explored as a city government emulating a facility like that and different parts of our existing owned land in that entire multiple 100-mile corridor. Again, build places where people actually might recover. And so to me, thinking outside the box in that regard is really important. But that centralized intake center is a place, oh, by the way, when you talk to police officers or social service workers in San Francisco often, that's okay. When you encounter someone who's homeless and they might want to come off the streets that night, what do? And to your point about a Web3 solution to this, they said, oh, I know Susie at this shelter. I give her a call, say, do you have a bed? Right? It's haphazard. It's who you know, and it's a one-off thing as opposed to even like a centralized database to say, okay, what's available right now? That just doesn't exist. And it's crazy that we are here in San Francisco that was the innovation capital of the world, and we don't even have that technology for our first responders or our social service workers encountering these individuals on our streets.
Absolutely. And we wholeheartedly believe that is a huge part of the solution as well. And we would love to build that with you if that's something that you're interested in.
For sure. 100, like 1,000%, by the way. Has to be part of it.
We have these like Yelp, right, that you can go to find out what restaurants are open, at odd hours of the night in your neighborhood. But the fact that you can't find a shelter bed or assist someone in finding a shelter bed is really unfortunate. So it's part of it is creating tools that the community can use to support our vulnerable population as well that is living in the streets, because they do need support and they do need assistance. And I think a lot of us feel quite helpless in that. So many great things here.
I mean, let me just say, how is it not possible in the world that we live in today, San Francisco? I know we've lost our mantra as the innovation capital of the world and what have you, that we don't have city workers with an app on their phone that could click in and say, okay, what shelter beds are available tonight? And you mandate that with city funding each of the existing shelters or other places that have beds as part of the city funding, you have to mandate that you keep this open and you have the interface on your own computers. How is that not happening? That's absolutely insanity.
So we actually have something in beta, and we have our developer here in the room right now. Lorenzo, would you like to maybe share with Mark a little bit about the Ellis app and what is being built? I'm putting you on the
spot, buddy.
I'm putting you
on
the
spot here. Yeah. So where is Kent? Yeah. So we did our beta test with YWAM, which is, this modern day monastery in the Tenderloin, as I like to describe it. Yeah, and that's literally what we're building. We're building a directory powered by Geo that enables all the nonprofits to coordinate and share their availability. And so that way anybody can just make a referral. And it has this Yelp-like functionality to it that also helps. Actually, Kent and I talked about this, right? I think it really helps the different service providers be more willing to take a chance on people they don't know. So it's not just limited to referrals from people they have a pre-existing relationship with, but instead they can see, everybody's history, their track record in trying to get better. And so.
That sounds awesome. Just a quick follow-up question just to you. Have you heard that some of the service providers are hesitant to take people in if they don't know them?
Yes. Yeah. What I would say the biggest thing, just to put it at the top of your mind, I would say the biggest barrier to anything is just the red tape. And I think you'll be in a position to potentially identify all those areas. But honestly, I don't think we're missing people willing to build technology or just other systems to help out. I think, honestly, the bottleneck to more innovation in the nonprofit space is the red tape.
And the red tape, sorry, the red tape within City Hall or the red tape within these individual organizations, or both?
Both.
Thank you.
One of the things I'm working on is standardizing the language by which we all take care of individuals. Then the data that actually comes in a way that's usable, and then we can actually put it together. So we're working on solving the underside of that whole process with the nonprofits. But anybody that gets over $100,000 from the city is obligated to share data. Problem is they share bad data because nobody has a standard. The city doesn't have a standard by which the structure can then be used and leveraged.
I love it. When I was in office before, I created the first chief data officer position in San Francisco to synthesize existing city data, which was never followed through on after I left office. So it kind of is what it is. So can't wait to bring that stuff back.
Yeah, and we have been in conversation with Michelle Littlefield, who I was speaking to you about earlier, who's a data architect that has been working with the city of San Francisco to harmonize data and create dashboards to help people understand, and all of the different departments of the city work better together. So we're looking forward to working with her and transferring some of that knowledge over to a Web3 database. I can see a lot of wheels turning, so I am just going to open it up for questions, and we can continue this conversation. Let's start with Christina here.
So I love your idea about the shelter first approach. And I think we share the same vision, actually. So what we here at the House of Web3 have been working on is something called Brownstone X. I actually run a company right now that provides affordable housing for people who are coming to the area that are looking for internships, stuff like that. But we have a nonprofit that we're starting that essentially what we want to do is get like a mall type approach where we have a big building, we have the centralized operators, and we have shelter there. So they can be inside of that mall, sleep there, and it's a 24/7, like what you said, 24/7 wraparound services. They get whatever they need, and we find them, we connect them with housing, or they can stay there as long as they need. And we want it to be about 5 years, 5-year plan. And we don't want it to be like a permanent thing for them, but we want to make sure that they find housing. So we would love to partner with you on that.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah, so it'd be a triage center where people would know this is a central place where they can go to get services and get immediate help with a dignified way to live and heal, and then connect them to services and other programs where they could stay for longer periods of time.
And it would be a collaboration with existing services in the city in a place where they don't have to pay for the infrastructure to get built. They're always at 97% capacity in their own infrastructure. And here this could easily be expanded and shrunk depending on the population, but we would also get data to track which of the organizations actually collaboratively work with the city to end homelessness and which ones are kind of making money because of homelessness, which is a whole industry we're trying to help unglue that or unwind that ball string.
I'll tell you, one of the biggest things when I was in City Hall before, and we never, to my chagrin, I never took the lead on diving deep on this because just raising the concept came with so much criticism, was for our homeless population in San Francisco. I'd love people's opinions here or data. How many people are homeless that are San Franciscans, and however you want to phrase that, whether you've don't have to be born and raised here by any means, but like you've been here for a while, again, define a while, or people came here that were homeless. And because if you think about the difference, what I was always told when I was in City Hall to accept as fact, 70 or 80% are in San Francisco living as residents and then become homeless in the city. That will dictate a certain type of policy response, I believe, right? A lot more of these rental subsidies, don't slip into homelessness. A lot of other programs. I've been in the Tenderloin a lot during the course of this campaign, walked the streets with a lot of people who are actually from the Tenderloin, guys like JJ and other people who I'm sure most folks know here. And I asked them, I said, well, what's your view on this? And the comment is now it's 10 to 20%. And that dictates a wholly different policy response in San Francisco, because then people are actually coming here to be homeless. And that's a wholly different way to think about the issue, policy approach where we spend our capital. So anyways, if people have views on that, I would love to hear that.
So in the Bayview district, we know Adrian, who's a friend of our We Heart SF. He runs an organization called Open Table, where there's homes.
Door legal.
Open Door Legal, sorry. Open Door Legal. And he's got civil representation. And what he did is he reduced homelessness in places where there are homes. He didn't reduce homelessness in the Tenderloin because they don't have homes. But in areas where they do have assets and resources and they've been forced out because they do live there, they tend to be homeless in the areas where they lose their homes. And he was able to restore, we say 50%, but he says 49%, like who's splitting hairs? But he was able to reduce homelessness during COVID and during those areas out there simply by giving them a civil representation at no cost up front and really restoring them to their houses. Now, that's not going to be true of every neighborhood in San Francisco, but in the right areas, those resources are really helpful. And most people don't even know that's available.
Paul?
So, oh.
Mark asked if anybody had any thoughts about the stats on that. After you left office, the UCSF Benioff study did the largest study on homelessness in California in decades, found that 75% of the homeless population in California were previously housed in the county that they currently live in. And that's just the largest study done on that. And a lot of times when people are talking to homeless people, they're talking to the people that are like most visibly homeless. A lot of homelessness exists in the shadows, and people like are temporary homeless, couch surfing and stuff like that. But that's just something to add to that. But I did have a question. One of your policies is to clear the tent encampments. That's correct. We don't really have enough jails to put all those people in. But this group's stated goal is to end homelessness in San Francisco, which not even today. Do you have a stated written plan or goal to end homelessness? Specifically end homelessness, not just address
Why
it.
do I have that?
Why don't you on your website? And then my second question is, if you support a Vision Zero for traffic fatalities, as mayor, would you support a Vision Zero for homelessness?
So sure, absolutely. A little bit informed by maybe my history in San Francisco growing up here. I think the notion to truly end homelessness is a little bit of a fallacy. I don't know that I think people are going to hear that and they double click on that and say, that's not honest. Like, to me is how can we, let's take a first step. How can we make a massive difference on the streets of our city and really make a major dent in that? Ending homelessness in San Francisco, sure, I'll be aspirational about it. Absolutely. Happy to say that. But if I'm being honest with you right here, I don't think that the next mayor is going to come in 80 years and end homelessness in San Francisco. That's a fair point. No, so this is my point. I take your point on that. Fair enough. I'm happy to articulate it that way, if that makes sense. The Vision Zero was not my concept, if you will. That was some of my colleagues back in the day in San Francisco, and unfortunately, double clicking on that one, despite a lot of stuff we've done, we haven't reduced traffic fatalities in San Francisco or pedestrian fatalities in San Francisco. So I don't think those policies have necessarily yielded results, but I take your point in terms of semantics. I really do. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So my name is Ted Hawes, and one of the We Heart SF community members is Love Never Fails. Jen works for them, and my friend Vanessa founds it. They help victims of human trafficking. So human trafficking is a very significant issue in the Bay Area. The FBI identified San Francisco as one of 13 high-intensity child sex trafficking areas in the U.S. Some of our policies that have been made, and albeit they're not all citywide, they're coming from the state, have been very bad policies that have increased this further. What is your plan as a mayor to address that issue? I mean, I think if we're talking of aspiration for zero, human trafficking, child sex trafficking should be zero, and I think we could all agree. So what is your plan to address that?
So I appreciate that. And I'm going to be honest with you. I've been campaigning for about 7 months now. It's the first time I've asked that question. So I appreciate that. And first of all, I'm as a parent of kids, like absolutely 100% whatever we need to do. I'm not going to sit here and BS you and say that I have a plan around this, because to be honest with you, I've never heard that being a major issue in the city of San Francisco right now. But could you, if you mind for a second articulating, you talked about some of the state policies that are not helping the situation. What are those? And what could a city of San Francisco do, in your opinion?
Vanessa could speak about it a lot clearer. I don't remember the exact one. There was one that was just passed that for the first time ever made it a felony to pay for sex with a child. So that's a good one.
So SB 1414.
1414. But there was an earlier one that decriminalized solicitation for the sake of prostitution. So, and
I
those
believe it
on the
was
ground,
loitering for the sake of.
loitering for the sake of SB3, maybe, yes, maybe you can help me on that. That means the police were not able to intervene unless they had hard evidence that the child was a minor, so 17, 16, 17, and they saw a transaction taking place. And it basically, probably there's some justification for it, or at least there was some stated justification for it. But the net result was empowering traffickers.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I appreciate what you're saying there. I think I understand that. Yeah, look, there was a move to decriminalize prostitution here in San Francisco for quite some time, which I would not agree with at all. I'm sorry, just the kid thing, just as a dad, just strikes me in a very, very different way. And I will be honest with you, where I've heard it the most in the city of San Francisco right now is in the intermission around Shotwell and some of these other streets where the neighbors are having a real problem with prostitution on that few block radius on Shotwell. I think there's one other adjacent street to it where it's put the bollards up, if you will, and a lot of things have been happening there. That is kind of caught the symptoms, that's the end result, the output of it, as opposed to talking about policies within that. I would just say I'm not in favor of decriminalizing prostitution or any of those law softening kind of ideas around this topic area. So whatever I'm able to do here locally as mayor, I think a lot of these laws around policing and penalties are state laws, but I'm all for listening to and moving forward with 100%. One follow-up.
Yes, I think the answer would be to engage with people who are subject matter experts, who are survivors themselves, and bring them into the process. That's one of the things we're doing. That's why we helped get behind that law that was just passed. But bringing subject matter experts like Vanessa and her network of people who can share the problem and their perspective from a different angle, bring them into the policy-making decisions. And is that something you'd support as a mayor, bringing them in to advise you, tell you what the problem is and what they see as the best solution?
1,000%.
Thank you.
Mr. Farrell, I've sat here and listened to everything you've had to say about the homeless. I was homeless for 7 years. I've been off the streets for 4 months. If it wasn't for Kent and Steve at YWAM, I'd have never went inside. Everybody out on the streets right now does not trust the mayor's office. They don't trust the cops or the cleanup crew. You're the first one that I've heard say something about putting them someplace besides a shelter. Not all of us can go in a shelter. I'm claustrophobic. There ain't no way. I'd end up in jail if I went to a shelter. You're the first one that says there's something besides a shelter. Why can't somebody get that going? I know a lot of people out in the streets. If you had a ranch like you said you do to go to, they'd go to it, but they won't go to a shelter.
Well, there you go. That's where, look, so first of all, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you're not homeless today.
No.
I'm truly glad to hear that.
Do I like my apartment? No, I can't stand it because I'm claustrophobic.
Okay. But it's better than being on the streets, hopefully. And yeah, that's why this is an issue that's been around in San Francisco for a long time. We've never had a mayor willing to do, this kind of generically speaking, out of the box thinking and just try different approaches. It's more the same. It's, I don't want to face criticism. And it's letting it fester and allowing people to slowly disintegrate and denigrate on our streets. And to me, again, it's just not humane, and it's not right for our city and our neighborhoods, because neighborhoods are getting crushed by this. And so but the reality is, in my view, this isn't right now. Oftentimes it gets presented as a false choice. Either you're going to be super sympathetic to people that are homeless on the streets and forget the people that live in San Francisco or, you know, in apartments or renting home, whatever, or you're going to be really harsh to people. And then you're gonna support people that live here in homes and in apartments. I think that's a false choice. I think you can actually do the same at the same time, where you can focus on helping people, help get them off the streets in more attractive environments. And not everything's going to be the same and everyone's going to want the same thing, but also clean up our neighborhoods at the same time. I think that's eminently doable, but only if you have a change of leadership.
What would you do as mayor to try to get the people to trust you that are on the streets? Because they don't trust anybody right now.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to pretend that that's an overnight solution, right?
No, it's not.
Yeah. And it's about showing the right empathy and showing the right policies that are actually helping people further their own lives. Again, if we show some examples to people, and you know, how does that trickle back to trust for an individual on the streets? I think it's not overnight success, right?
Right.
But you start to have examples of people that you're able to bring off the streets, that you get them connected with services, that they start having a different life that they're proud of now and they're really excited about. Maybe they go back and tell their friends. Maybe somehow they give them, maybe it goes back to, I mean, again, how it gets back to everybody on the street, practically speaking, I don't know how that works. But you have to start somewhere. You have to start helping people and cleaning up our neighborhoods. And you can do that in a very different way than we're approaching it today. And I think have dramatic success.
Hell, Mr. Farrell, I'd rather go to your ranch than be in that apartment.
Love it. Amazing.
Not so much a question. Hello, mate. Barmy. Everyone calls me Mash. Sort of following up on what Ted said. Obviously, I'm not from San Francisco, but I do live in California, and it's god awful here. All the solutions that you lot have been talking about already exist. There are organizations, as Ted's alluded to, that are doing it already at a high clip, very successfully. Outcomes are 85% success rate, like City Team, Salvation Army, Love Never Fails, all these fantastic organizations, and very little recidivism. So once they're in these programs, which are abstinent space, there's a success. I'd be interested to shift the conversation within City Hall and within the mayor's office to, okay, how do we stop trying to create solutions? You lot should just remove yourselves from creating solutions, in my mind, in my perspective, and start talking to the problem solvers. Like what you're doing today, this is significant because it's an admittance that we may not have the solution ourselves. And that is okay. That's actually a step in the right direction to say, like, we don't know what we're doing, but these lot know what they're doing. So why aren't we partnering with these people, right? Is it a faith thing? Is it a arrogance thing? And speaking to this young man's point, I don't believe anyone here is under the assumption or the illusion, anyone worth their salt, certainly, that you're going to have the total eradication of homelessness. It is not possible, but we can certainly have a significant decline in impact with the homelessness. And I think it starts with partnering, removing yourself from being the problem solver and taking funding from those organizations who are paid to maintain homelessness and reallocating those resources to the YWAMs and the other organizations.
Couldn't agree more. I love it. Look, I'm here to tell you, first of all, City Hall and I myself as a former and prospective mayor don't have all the solutions. I think I mentioned this earlier, one of City Hall's biggest fallacies right now and problems is we can't admit and be humble enough to look outside our own city walls to say, hey, where can we pull from other areas in the US or the world that are doing things correctly, or other organizations within our own city limits that are doing it the right way and having results that we want to emulate. And all I can say is I couldn't agree with you more in terms of funding, defunding organizations that are perpetuating homelessness on the streets of our city and focus funding on actual organizations that are solving it and really having outcomes. To your point, look, I will just say this philosophically in terms of City Hall. I am done with ideology. All these paradigms exist inside of City Hall. YIMBY, NIMBY, progressive, moderate. What good has that gotten us? We need to toss all those out the door and have a mayor focus on results. Hold me accountable. Put on my own dashboard. Hold me accountable to what we agree on, we should be held accountable to. Criticize me all you want. If I do it wrong, absolutely. If I do it right, I don't need a pat on the back, but just be like, okay, I'm gonna leave him alone now. That to me is accountability, and we need to get this ideology. So I'm fully with what you're talking about, 100%. I believe it's where we need to go.
Hi, Mark. My name's Nikita. I run the Recovery DAO along with Kent in the back, who is part of YWAM. I spent 20 years as a drug addict and an alcoholic before kind of finding my way through the process. I have two different questions. They both have to do with props. So the first one is Prop 36, which, so perfect. I don't have to explain it to you, obviously. I just want to know, like, you know, it's perfect. Prop 36 is asking for those who are found to be using drugs on the street to be required to go into rehab services. Is that more or less?
Yeah, there's a part of it that the central part of it is reversing out Prop 47.
Okay.
But
Perfect.
yes.
Yes, definitely. Which seems a little chaotic with the amount of money that City Hall has been designating towards projects like the Managed Alcohol Project, which is, yeah, anyway, you don't, I love the way that your face looked when I said that, along with the amount of money that has been spent on foil and needles and those kinds of things. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Prop 36 and if this seems like a long-term viable project. The second thing is that for the first part of this year, we worked heavily on providing a service list of all of the nonprofits in the city of San Francisco. There's a lot of redundancy in the nonprofit. And we heard you talk a little bit about this at your town hall. I'd love to hear a little bit more about accountability and how much money City Hall is giving to nonprofits and that redundancy. We don't need something on Ellis Street that's doing some, and then something on, right, 3 streets over. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it.
So to me, again, the central thrust on 36 is reversing out Prop 47, which was passed about 12 years ago. I think it's a failed experiment in our state. It increased the line, which was the dollar value line between what's a misdemeanor and what's a felony in terms of theft, raised it to $950. Right now, I think public safety is such in the city of San Francisco, and we're in such a rough state that we need to give police officers every tool in their tool shed possible to enforce laws and to hold people accountable for crime in our city. So that's why I'm supporting 36. I will say this philosophically, though, acknowledging that getting people off the streets can be voluntarily or involuntarily. You know, there's a state law that exists that said if the city of San Francisco administers Narcan to somebody for a second time, that we can take them into 72-hour cycle into county jail. I'd rather not, but I think it needs to be part of our solution because everyone I've talked to in fentanyl recovery, they had a short period of time in incarceration. They didn't just in between that hour and a half or 2 hours that they're taking a new hit say, I'm going to make a different decision with my life and it all worked out great. Give them a chance to get off their fentanyl high, their fentanyl fog, however you want to phrase it, and give them a chance to make a different decision to go into recovery. Ultimately, though, you know, those programs have to be voluntary based. And so the notion to force them into that, I think, is not a long-term solution. It's not going to be viable long-term. So anyways, that's my perspective. Sorry, your second part was around, the nonprofits. Look, so here's the reality. We spend way too much and we're so inefficient with our spending around nonprofits in San Francisco today out of our city government. I want to be very careful. There's some great nonprofits in town that we need to support, respect what they do. A lot of them that I know that do great work that my family volunteers at, they don't want city funding. But here's the reality. For instance, last year, our current mayor funded 248 nonprofits just for homeless services. And the worst part is, multiple instances, the same nonprofit was getting funding from 6 different city departments with 6 different contracts. And so think about that. Inefficient, ineffective. We basically have outside organizations playing City Hall off against each other in different departments. So what's the solution in my experience? Well, my experience is, first of all, the least sexy part about being mayor is to be an active manager of your city government. We need the next mayor to be that because we're missing that today. When I was mayor, I know I was at my desk at 8:15. We brought out whiteboards, brought in department heads, teams, wrote policy, talked to underlying staff, brought them back the next week if it wasn't working. We were actively managing over 50 direct department reports. The next mayor is going to also inherit a $16 billion budget and 35,000 plus city employees. Unless you have someone with experience of an organization of that magnitude, but also the desire, not the willingness, but the desire to actually granularly manage that, we're going to suffer as a city. And right now we have a mayor that is governing by press release a lot, not actively engaging with departments. And so you have these departments essentially running their own agendas now with department heads. A lot of it based on ideology. I think DPH, I think MTA, I mean, we could go on and on. And so to me, and then the issue is every department has their ability to issue their own third-party contracts to for-profit or nonprofit entities. So you think about the governance gulf between an inactive mayor and where these contracts are being signed. It's the lack of oversight is stark. And we've seen a lot of the corruption that exists now, right, as a result of it, which is unfortunate. Only because it really, I mean, on its face, but it erodes people's faith in city government, which is a problem. So the solution to me, I'm very public about this. As soon as I get into office, I'm going to cut off every department's ability to issue their own third-party contracts and bring it under one centralized department right away. Likely in our city administrator. And to me, I think that does three things. So number one, it's not 100%, but it really cuts off the vast majority of those structural conditions that have existed that have led to a lot of this corruption, right? Because you're under one department that's actively managed. Second of all, you're able to be more efficient and effective with your spending because no longer will you issue 6 different contracts to the same entity, nonprofit or otherwise. Just you won't do it. So you can't get played, if you will. And then lastly, it allows us to truly say as a city government, these are performance contracts. KPIs, performance metrics, however we want to phrase it from the private sector, we're installing these, and if you don't perform against them, you're not getting your funding next year. These are not annuities, and you can't view them as such anymore. Because I think the reality is, with a lot of the nonprofits in San Francisco right now, you know, I think most people in the population of San Francisco think of the nonprofit world as maybe somebody on their own thought they wanted to do good, and they started a nonprofit entity, maybe with a partner, and maybe they raised a little money. Maybe they have some success. Maybe they got some board members on that would either subject area experts or could raise money or do something like that. And then ultimately, if they did well enough, they ultimately wanted to expand or do something more, and somehow they were made aware of the city government or a government entity, and they got funding from them. The reality is right now, most of the nonprofits are 100% funded by our city government. So the articulation of that discussion is about fighting for their own personal salaries now, to your point about overlapping services, as opposed to an objective point of view of what's going on the streets of our city. And we need to bring that evaluation back. I don't have the authority.
Hello. Hey, what's up, Mark? Thanks for coming and talking to us. So I saw that you are you posted a white dudes for Harris meme. And Kamala Harris came from San Francisco, and from what I understand, she is responsible in great deal for causing a lot of the problems that your campaign is promising to solve. So I'm wondering if you could explain your thought process around that and how that reconciles.
Sure. So I was a born and raised Democrat here in the city. My first job out of college was working for Clinton Gore in 1996 presidential campaign. So I've been a Democrat my whole life. And no elected official, in my view, is ever perfect. The policies they espouse, there's never going to be 100% overlap in what you believe in. And so there's a lot of things that she did when she was here in office locally that I didn't agree with. A lot of things she's talked about on a national level that I've disagreed with. However, you contrast that, in my view, with Donald Trump, and you have a vastly different conversation and discussion. Who he is as an individual, as a human being, what it represents. I mean, some economic policies I actually tend to agree with a decent amount of them. But the threat that he presents to our democracy writ large and to our government, I think is so dramatic that I am a big believer in Kamala Harris. Not that I believe she's perfect, but I believe certainly in the context of who she's running against, I'm an unabashed supporter.
Okay, I just want to point out that you gave me an ideological answer and party politic answer. And this gentleman was talking about trust before, and I liked a lot of your policies before. But my trust in you has just gone to zero.
I'm sorry to
So
hear that.
thank you.
Hi, I wanted to get back to your previous point on when you're centralizing. I think it's brilliant. That's what we were just discussing it here, centralizing all the awarding of the monies to nonprofits, and I think that gives you control. But having the second part, which is have an agreement with them about what they're going to try to achieve and those methods, and that signed agreement between the two then has something that you can measure them with. And coming here, I listen to a lot of really good ideas, but a lot of these groups are missing a way to measure the outcomes of those. And truly, when you follow people, for instance, somebody who's unhoused and you want to give them services, you want to measure the effects of those services against outcomes. And so putting that as a part of these policies, putting this as a part of the contracts in the government, I think is how we succeed and how we know we're going to succeed. And you come out of business, so Six Sigma kind of approach to it is where you're going to set that up, you're going to test to see if it worked. And if not, then you've got a way to move forward to change it, to test again until you get better. So anyway, I'm not saying I've got a question. I'm just saying that I applaud that approach.
I appreciate it. Thanks. And what I saw before when I was in City Hall and the short period of time I was mayor and when I was budget chairs, a lot of these entities actually don't want performance metrics. Because why would you if you don't have to abide by them, right? So I want to also caution to say this is not going to be without its own fight and criticism, right? And demagoguery and all that stuff. And you're being harsh or something like that. And you don't understand what I do. I've heard that all before. And, not only that, but the ones that sometimes have gotten settled on before. I mean, certain of these contracts right now is how many physical touches you make on someone's person. So I think there was one, a friend of mine told me about, he's still in City Hall, said if a outreach worker physically touches someone 3 times, just does this, okay, walks away, that counts as contact, and that's satisfying their contract. To your point, it has to be about outcomes. We have to get focused on results and solutions and stop kind of mitigating and kind of going along kind of with the status quo right now. If you want that, please don't vote for me. If you want the status quo, that's for me, my perspective is to come in and break a little glass here and change up and challenge the status quo at every level inside of City Hall. I think we can have a dramatic difference.
So I have a question for you. If you were to win mayor, would you come back to our community to get connected with the folks that really want to see some help in the city?
Love to do it. Done.
All right, we're running out of time, so Nicole,
I just wanted to touch on one last thing. So you talked about shelter first versus housing first, which I do believe that is a great solution for the immediate. What does that actually look like beyond just a concept? What does that look like? Because we need to have more than just congregate shelters, unattractive solutions that nobody wants to go to. How do we make that more attractive? How do we increase the number of shelter beds and make it a viable solution that people would actually be willing to go to?
Yeah, I mean, look, and there's going to be tension here always, right? And I think the reality is, though, from my perspective, is you think about cost effectiveness of dollars spent getting people off the streets with a roof over their head. That's where, to me, shelter becomes such a more economically viable solution to really have ability to move massive amounts of people off the streets of our city as opposed to permanent subsidized housing, just from a cost to build, let alone ongoing services, ongoing costs. And so to me, it's a variety of solutions, right? It's a 24/7 intake center. It's using Log Cabin Ranch and having different types of options available. Is there always going to be tension to say, hey, that's not perfect for me, I don't want to come up? Sure, right? So we have to be mindful of that conversation, I think, as a city government, mindful of our own financial restraints, but at the same time, realize that we want to get people off the streets for themselves and for our neighborhoods, and it's in our own best interest to create options that are more attractive so individuals will actually come off on a voluntary basis.
We agree. And the other thing is with recovery services, if somebody decided right now on a Wednesday at 1:13 in the afternoon, that they were ready, they might be able to go to at least be able to have a conversation about recovery options. But let's say it's Sunday at 3 a.m. There's no place available for them to go to. And these are very small windows of opportunity that you can access when someone actually makes that decision for themselves. So what kind of resources do you see making available so that people who do choose recovery or when they're ready could actually access some of those resources?
Yeah, that's why when I talk about a centralized intake center, it's a 24/7 centralized intake center. It is open all the time. We have to meet people where they are if we're going to be successful. If you don't want to be successful, keep going down the same road. Methadone clinic 4 hours a week. I mean, that's a joke. So it has to be available all the time. And it comes with a cost. But to me, if we're going to be serious about making a dent in this issue or getting to zero on this issue, that's where we got to be.
Do you have an idea of where that could be located in the city?
We have a few different sites, but we're not going to talk about it right now.
And how long do you think it would be before that could be up and running?
Depending on the site, within the first year.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, or we can go ahead and wrap it up. Okay, Uli in the back, one more question, then we'll wrap it up.
I'll try to keep it super short. I used to live in Japan as a kid, and in Tokyo in particular, and there's occasional images of like the future of what San Fran Tokyo could look like if like San Francisco were to be evolved like Tokyo. And they managed to scale up to like 40 million people. Housing was never an investment thing there, and they just built. You don't get huge apartments there, but everybody seems to have a home. So I'm wondering, like, having lived here for 10 years, I rarely see anything being built. I know there's a huge incentive for current homeowners to not allow new construction, but I'm wondering, is there maybe like a space race analogy to be had in the US where cities or counties can compete on like the average price of a 2-bedroom apartment, like going down over time and just like build as much as possible to satisfy that? Is that like a super naive dream, or is that like a possibility?
We talked, I don't know if you're here in the beginning when we talked about it, touch on housing a little bit, and my view on housing. I just fundamentally believe we need to build a lot more housing here in San Francisco. The space race to look like Tokyo, I'll be honest with you, I don't want San Francisco to look like Tokyo. I believe the beauty of our city is in our neighborhoods and found in the unique character of, and I don't care if you like to hang out in the Mission or Noe Valley or the Sunset or North Beach. That's the beauty of our city. But I believe within the context of our neighborhoods, we should be building everywhere in San Francisco. I'm very clear though, I do believe, I don't want to see a high rise on Ocean Beach or a high rise, on Marina Boulevard. I don't think that makes sense. I think the greatest amount for upzoning and true massive density is in the Financial District, South of Market, Mission Bay neighborhoods, best served by regional local transit. I mean, there's all the reasons in the world for it. But we need transit corridors, individual legislation, our neighborhoods, form-based density. I think we can build everywhere for sure. But we can be, and here's the thing as well. I talked about ideology before and getting rid of it. Right now we have these fights about, our current mayors propose essentially upzoning every neighborhood. And what that's done is resulted in no housing, but lawsuits and fights and pitting people on extremes in the city of San Francisco. We need to start getting away from that and saying, you know what, I can actually, instead of a blunt tool instrument and saying on Chestnut Street and Lombard here, we should be 12 and 14 stories high, I can take a big scalpel and get to our desired amount of units in San Francisco without creating all these fights and these lawsuits and get after building. Because right now, ideology has not helped and it's only exacerbated the issue. And if we continue down the same road with our current administration, we're going to keep going down that road. And we're going to have lawsuits around our housing element, lawsuits on projects. And it doesn't have to be that way. If you can articulate to people, and I straddle the middle, I'm not an NIMBY and I'm not a YIMBY. Like, if you straddle the middle and say, we need to build more housing, here's how we're going to do it. We can take a programmatic approach. This is where it takes mayor to be granular, block by block. Care about this. Care what we talk about block by block. Just don't say, yeah, the west side needs to upzone. That's ridiculous. That doesn't make sense. That's not being an active mayor for a certain neighborhood. That's not what we need in San Francisco. We need someone who's going to care about every neighborhood, talk to the residents, understand what they think about, and then move forward with a solution where you can actually succeed on housing. We haven't done that today. I look forward to making that difference in our city because I think, look, my honest answer to you is in 4 years from now, my daughter's a freshman in college in Boston. I want her to move back here. But the number one thing that she's going to have to tackle is the cost of housing. And so to me, I'm very much personally incented to lower that cost and build more housing, especially for young folks coming to San Francisco.
Thank you so much. Is there one last thing that you'd like to leave us with today?
I appreciate you all having me here today. And yes, I look forward to being back as mayor for sure.
Thank you so much,
Thanks, everyone.
Mark. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone.